Welcome back to another Pirkei Avot text explication with me, your host, Rabbi Drew. We are now on the 16th text in the 5th chapter. What separates this from the first 15 texts is that all of those were very numbers driven. We had a bunch of texts that start off with the number 10, a couple of texts with the number 7, and then 6 texts with the number 4. We're seemingly out of numbers. We are now moving on to other things. We're going to encounter a handful of texts not driven by numbers, no numbers involved. So if you're not a math person, this may be very comforting. But we do see something that is similar to the first 15 texts that we're going to now encounter in the next handful of texts. Is unlike the first 4 chapters of Pirkei Avot, no named sages. There's no names attached by sages. So just a sneak peek, towards the end of the chapter, there will be a handful of texts that will have names attached to them. We're going to actually hear from specific rabbis. But so far, the first 15, and including this text, there's no names. They're anonymously taught texts here in Pirkei Avot. So what have we got? Kol ahava shehi teluya badavar. All love that's dependent upon something. Batel davar, batela ahava. If that thing goes away, if it ceases to exist, so too does that love. Conversely, kol ahava she'eno teluya badavar. Now, all love that is not dependent upon a particular thing, eno batela la'olam. It never cancels out. It's never nullified. It never ceases. Okay, so 2 sides of this coin. All love that's dependent upon something, once that thing that goes away, so too does the love. And which, sounds nice, which sounds neat. And then beautifully, we have the converse, which is all love that isn't dependent upon something, it never ceases. Okay, it's not dependent upon that thing. So that if there is something dependent, if that love is dependent upon something, it's ultimately a vulnerability of sorts for that love to endure. Now, this sounds lovely. This sounds nice. It's nice to talk about love, but it's very abstract. It's a lovely concept, but what does this mean? What does it look like? Well, we have examples. Ezehi ahavat hatulia vadavar. So what is this type of love that is dependent upon something? Zo ahavat Amnon Tamar. This is the love that Amnon had for Tamar. I'll explain. But first I want to finish with the final line. Ve'ezahi she'ena tului b'davar. What is the type of love that is not dependent upon a particular thing? Zo ahavat David v'Yonatan. This is David and Jonathan's love for each other. Okay. So we have these 2 examples, biblical examples, and in fact, they're both from the book of Samuel. So we have 2 examples from the same biblical book. What are these examples? So for those either less familiar with this book, maybe you haven't read it, or maybe you just haven't read it in a while and are not so familiar with who are these 4 biblical characters in the book of Samuel. It's a great question. So let's talk about David and Jonathan. They had a really great love, and you can particularly see it, for example, in the first book of Samuel in chapter 18. They had a very strong love. They had a good bond, and it's not dependent upon anything. They just there's nothing in particular. Now, what does that mean? I think we'll get a good sense of it now that we're going to juxtapose it with Amnon and Tamar. And then we'll understand it better. So what is that love that Amnon had for Tamar? Now, I will point out, by the way, in the Hebrew of this text, it actually says Amnon v'Tamar, which literally translates to Amnon and Tamar. That seemingly that there was a reciprocal, 2-directional love going on, but that's actually not evident at all. We have so the story here of Amnon and Tamar you can find in the second book of Samuel in chapter 13. Now, in that, Amnon is, technically, they are half siblings, Amnon and Tamar. They are half siblings. They share the same father, which is King David. So we just mentioned David right? We just mentioned David. So when he's much older, he's king at that point, and he has a bunch of children, including these two half-siblings, Amnon and Tamar. And Amnon sees Tamar, really interested in her, and yes, you can guess it. He wants to be sexually involved with her. He wants to have sex with her. And he coerces her, and ultimately he does all sorts of, it's not good. It's just not good. Amnon rapes Tamar. Okay, and he cajoles her, and it's just really not, it's a really uncomfortable chapter to read. And what we see is not only that, but once he does rape her, he wants nothing to do with her. Kicks her out, bars the door after her, wants nothing to do with her. Meaning the love that Amnon had for Tamar, the thing upon which it was dependent, was having sex with her, was having her body and having sex with her. That was the love upon which was dependent for Amnon. But once he had, I guess, taken her virginity, and by the way, that is specifically mentioned at the top of that 13th chapter there in the 2nd Samuel, that seemed to be the thing that he was trying to get. But once he had acquired her virginity or taken her virginity, just as his love ceased, just as the virginity ceased, so too did his love for her. That is something upon which that love was dependent. Now we have a better understanding of what is this David and Jonathan love. Well, there is no thing that they're trying to necessarily get from each other. It's just a good relationship. Maybe they just have good energies with each other. Maybe they just vibed with each other. Whatever it was, they had a good relationship, and they're not trying to necessarily get something from or out of the other person. They just relate well with each other, and that is an example of enduring love. It is not dependent upon extracting or getting something out of the other person. It's just simply that type of love will endure. So I hope this was an interesting and insightful text about love here, that if something's dependent, so the insights that this text has to share for us is that love that is dependent upon something, but once that thing goes away, so too does that love, because that was what was holding it together. And all love that is not dependent upon a particular thing, it can endure basically forever. So that's what we have for the 16th text in the 5th chapter, the 16th text in the 5th chapter. And thank you so much for watching.